And so we're gonna get started with this workshop. First of all, it is a pleasure to welcome you all to this workshop on the Government of Canada Workplace Accessibility Passport. It's a workshop for managers, but everyone is welcome. Today, we're going to cover a lot of territory through the next hour and a half. Our agenda is divided into three main sections. One that will talk about creating the conditions for an inclusive workplace. The second one will focus on how to use the Government of Canada Workplace Accessibility Passport from a manager's perspective. And the third will introduce two two scenarios, two examples that illustrate the use of the passport. Will excuse me. The use of the passport will model the use of the passport, and let me just explain that these scenarios are not necessarily representative of the way it is right now. Rather, they model the kinds of conversations that the passport is designed to bring. Um, Before I get into more details, there will be a question and answer session. We have taken some steps to make this session as accessible as possible. We have interpretation in American Sign Language, and I encourage you to spotlight the interpreter so you can follow their interpretation. We also have CART, and we have done everything we can to make this workshop as accessible as possible. After our three portions of the workshop, we will have a short break, and we will then conclude this workshop with a question and answer period. So before I turn it over to our ADM, Alfred McLeod, who's going to share some opening remarks with you, I would like to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. And I would encourage all of us to think about the contributions of Indigenous people, their experiences, and how we can all work together to make this society more inclusive and more diverse. So thank you very much. And now I'll turn it over to Alfred. Alfred McLeod is the Assistant Deputy Minister of the Office of Public Service Accessibility. I've had the pleasure to work with Alfred over the last few years and value his leadership, his commitment to accessibility and to full participation, and his wonderful sense of humor. So over to you, Alfred.
Thanks, Luna, and welcome everyone. And it's a pleasure to be here with you today. Luna mentions that we've worked together. We started working together in 2018, and part of what we were doing at the time was going around and meeting people and explaining what our mandate was here at the Office of Public Service Accessibility. And I wanted to be very polite and respectful of my colleague Luna. So when we would go to meetings, one of the first things I would do is I would introduce Luna to the people we were meeting. And I would say that, 9.5 times out of 10, when I would introduce Luna, people would say, "Oh, I've known Luna for 15 years." And I had to chuckle a little bit when the first comment in the chat today was, "Hi, Luna, I remember you from ESDC." So my experience has been traveling with Luna often requires no introduction, and that's proven out again today. So listen, to the participants, thank you for being here. We know that this is a really crazy time of the year in your lives as managers trying to get everything done so you can get a couple of days away with family and friends and pets, and that you're giving us a little bit of that precious time. We really appreciate it. I also want to thank the Passport team. It also works tirelessly on this project, and I'm just so fortunate to be able to work with such dedicated and talented people. So we have two great opportunities today. I think first, it's an opportunity to learn about the Passport, how it works, and how we can make it work for you and for your employees. Secondly, we can learn about the culture change that's going to be required if the promise of the Passport is actually going to be delivered. Because the Passport as a tool is interesting, but the message and the culture that it's trying to build and trying to support is even more interesting. So, think of the Passport as a project inside a larger project. Building the Passport isn't easy, but and changing culture is never easy. But if we can be successful on both fronts, I think we have a good chance of transforming the environment where a lot of employees today face significant barriers that keep them from being able to be the best that they can be in the workplace. And we'll work hard, but I'm sure that we'll get there. Earlier in my career, I remember facing a pretty short, tight deadline on what I thought was a pretty big project. I don't know how big it was, but at that time, I felt it was pretty big. And I remember getting a bit of advice from my manager who, wasn't going to fix my problem, but, she said to me, well, how does an anchovy eat a whale? And I said, well, I don't know. And she said, one bite at a time. So, when we look at the Passport, I find sometimes that that's what we're doing. It's an immense piece of work, and we're taking it one bite at a time. So today is, an exchange. It's a chance for us, us anchovies, to continue that work and maybe take another couple of bites out of the whale as we try to both explain what the Passport is, but also get some feedback from people who are there in the front lines and are really delivering for employees. So, I would hate for all of you to show up here and have us not ask you to do something. So this is what I'm asking you to do. I'm asking you to be part of the change. I'm asking each of you to use the privilege of leadership that you bring to your work and your authorities to help us advance the Passport and make it something that is available to more employees and in more organizations. We're fortunate in OPSA to have incredible students, and in OPSA, if you are a student, that just means you get to work harder than the rest of us. And this week is a special week for us because we have two of our four students work out of Alberta, and Cindy and Adiki are joining us this week from Alberta. And Adiki reminded me that the theme of this year's International Day of Persons with Disabilities is moving from intent to action. And wow, the Passport is an absolutely great opportunity for you as managers to help make this happen. So I wish you a very productive session. Again, thank you for your time. And to the person who needs no introduction, the floor is yours again.
Thank you, Alfred. And as a person who loves anchovies, I love your analogy and I love your quote. So thank you very, very much for these words of encouragement and for your ongoing support. So we're going to move to the first segment of this workshop, which is about creating an inclusive workplace. And for this part, I am proud and pleased to introduce to you Marc Gosselin. Marc Gosselin is a manager of union engagement and support to the NJC here as the Treasury Board of Canada Secretariat. Marc comes to us not only with his experience at TBS, but also with a wealth of experience related to workplace accommodations. And welcome, Marc. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for the invitation.
So, Marc, I'm going to ask you a few questions, and I'm going to ask you to share your perspective first on the legislative and policy framework that really expresses our obligations as a federal public service to create an inclusive and a healthy workplace. And that, I think, is going to help set the context for discussing roles and responsibilities of managers. So, Marc, over to you. Thank you.
It's a big question, and we could spend the rest of the afternoon on it. But I'll just highlight a few key elements that will set the foundation, as you said, for this conversation. The Canadian Human Rights Act basically states that every Canadian can live the life they want and cannot be discriminated for any factor. And in purpose with our conversation, disability is a prohibited ground for discrimination. In the public service, we're subject to the Employment Equity Act, where we have to identify barriers to employment to 4 groups. So persons with disability, women, visible minority, and Aboriginal people. And employers have to have a plan in place to identify the barriers and create systems that offer equal opportunity for everybody. A newer legislation is the Accessible Canada Act, a very interesting piece of legislation because it states a very ambitious goal that by 2040, there's no more barriers for Canadians. So we have to identify all those barriers, structural, systemic, attitudinal, and so forth. And we have to have a plan in place to eliminate those. In the public service specifically, we have the Treasury Board Policy on People Management, where we have a directive on duty to accommodate. It's a requirement that we accommodate employees with disability. We also have recourse mechanisms like the Directive on Prevention and Resolution of Harassment and so forth. But I think that the core of all this in the public service is our code of values and ethics. We have to respect people. We have to create respectful processes. And obviously it speaks to the persons with disability. And the challenge to the HR community, are our processes respectful? Do they deliver accommodation in a respectful, timely manner? Well, I think it's an important thing to consider in our reflection today. If we summarize all this legal environment, it would be as follows. You cannot discriminate on various grounds. Disability is one. You must treat people with respect. You must accommodate, but proactively, you must identify barriers and work towards eliminating them.
Thank you, Marc. Well said. And I think that really that sets the context for my next question. What, in your view, are roles and responsibilities of managers in creating an inclusive workplace for people with disabilities?
First step is looking in the mirror and really ask ourselves honestly, as a person, as a manager, do I have unconscious bias? How do I see persons with disability? How do I see disability itself? Did I create in my mind a hierarchy of disabilities? Nobody has to answer that publicly, but honestly, having that conversation, that reflection is very important. Because if we have, as manager, unconscious biases on disability, it will be difficult for us to create that respectful environment, to have that important conversations with our employees, and then to be really proactive towards providing accommodation. A thing that can help, it's just a suggestion. It's free, it's online on CBC Jam or ami.ca télé. It's a series called You Can't Ask That. And it's a TV show where they ask questions. Nobody there is asking persons with disability. So if you want to open your eyes to various situations, various type of disabilities, and how Canadians live with those disabilities, that's a great element.
Thank you,
And
Mark.
I forgot one
go
thing.
ahead. Continue. Go ahead.
Next thing, so once you've done that work, it's to then become an ally and challenge the status quo. As managers in the public service, we're subject to so many rules, and sometimes we take them for granted. Someone will tell us, oh, well, for that accommodation, you need a doctor's note. Well, I invite every managers to ask a few why question. So why do I need that doctor's note? What will be the value of that note? And then go at the root cause of these practices and identify why providing an accommodation is sometimes so difficult. You'll find that as a manager, you can make a big difference by simply challenging the existing processes and systems, and then work within the rules you have in your department, but at the same time, create an environment that is really open to accommodations and employees with disability.
Thanks, Mark. You've even started to answer the next question.
Right.
Because we'd like managers, participants today to walk out of this workshop with some concrete strategies, something that they can do as they return to their workplace tomorrow, to things that they can do, practical things that they can do to ensure their workplace, their team is more inclusive.
One very important thing is to be up to date with the training. So every department has training for managers to get their delegated authority, but it's very minimal. The Canada School of Public Service offers great material to update our knowledge and awareness on creating respectful, healthy, and safe and accommodating workplaces. So I really invite you to go through the offering at the school, and they offer great material. Another simple solution is also read the HR email you get in your generic inbox. HR teams and department communicate a lot of information on this. But I understand, I'm in the same situation. We're very busy, and sometimes unless we need the information today, well, we procrastinate. We leave it for later. And unfortunately, once we're facing the situation when we have an employee in front of us who requires an accommodation, or when we're facing a performance issue that may have an accommodation underlying cause, well, we're not ready. So I really invite you to take time in your week when you get these reminders from your HR team in your department. Get familiar with them, know where to go, know where to call in your department, know the resources available to you in your department, but in the public service as a whole. So you can be proactive, or if a question is sent to you or a request is sent to you, you know how to deal with it. I could also invite you to look beyond accommodation and support return to work, explore what we call now stay at work or recovery at work programs. They're really innovative way to look at the workplace based on the understanding that contributing at work is an essential part of health, of a healthy being. Finally, three skills I strongly recommend. While we all need to work on it, and especially in this context: active listening, build emotional regulation. So basically how to receive information we're not clear about or that may challenge us. How do we respond and manage that emotional response? And thirdly, compassion. So with active listening, proper emotional regulation, and compassion, we can really make a difference, and we can start working on this afternoon after this meeting.
Mark, thank you so much. I really, retain those three skills because they are so important. They are going to make a difference in your life no matter what you do, but definitely as a manager, they're going to make a difference for you and your team. Mark, thank you so much for your contribution to this workshop. The workshop, it's a pleasure to have you here today, and all the best.
Thank you very much. Thanks again.
All right. So we will move on to the second part of this workshop, and we're going to talk about the Government of Canada Workplace Accessibility Passport. As you know, the passport currently is a Word document. It's available to download on canada.ca accessibility, or it's also available on the Accessibility Hub GCpedia page. So it's the GCpedia page for the Office of Public Service Accessibility, the passport, and lots of resources um, are available on those websites. The passport is a tool. It is there to facilitate a conversation between an employee and their manager. It tells the manager, as an employee, these are the barriers I find. This is how I can function. These are the solutions that are going to make it possible for me to give my best contribution. And to talk to us about the passport, I am joined by my colleague, Clara Morgan. Clara, welcome. I have a few questions for you. So
Oh,
welcome to this workshop.
thank you, Luna. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, the passport wouldn't be what it is without you, Clara. I want to say that to all of our participants. So thank you for being here. So I'll start with my first question. So how is a manager supposed to know what accommodations, what workplace accommodations to provide if the employee isn't communicating what their quote unquote functional limitations are?
Oh, Luna, what a great question for somebody who's a manager who wants to create the inclusive workplace for employees and create this welcoming workplace for people with disabilities. So if an employee is not coming forward, I would encourage managers, just as I do with people I'm working with, to share the passport with them, to have a proactive conversation about the tools and supports they need to succeed in the workplace. And the conversation is more about the success of the employee. The conversation is not about functional limitations, but about the barriers the employee faces. The barriers can be communication or information barriers. They could be barriers related to the built environment. The barriers can also be related to the way the work is organized. So having that conversation separate from the performance discussion about what the employee needs to succeed at work and to proactively engage and create that trusting relationship with the employee is the way we want to do to approach the passport in the workplace.
Thank you, Clara. This is such a great response. And it is important to remember that it is about the workplace. So it is about what is going to work in the workplace for individuals. So on to a next question. Um, we know that the passport is an agreement between an employee and their manager. We also know that in order to put in place a certain number of tools or measures to accommodate employees, there are some steps that managers need to take. But are there is there any legislation or policy that determines how a passport is approved?
Well, the passport doesn't require any approval per se. The passport, the GC Workplace Accessibility Passport, is an agreement that the manager and the employee discuss together and agree on the supports and tools an employee would need. So it is important to remember that the owner of the passport is the employee, not the manager. The manager is there to support the employee to succeed at work. So it doesn't require approval, but it does require the manager doing their best to implement the solutions to the barriers that the employee has identified. So if an employee comes to me with their passport, we review it together, and they need a support or say an application, software application, I, as the manager, would help facilitate the request for that software application. It's the tools that I am facilitating because I want my team member to come to work and to be at their best and to succeed at work.
Thank you. Thank you, Clara. Another question. So we talked about the fact that as an employer, we have an obligation to provide reasonable accommodations. We also hear a lot about yes by default, and we're going to try to get into a little bit of what that means. So what if, as an employee, I do not agree with the solutions that my manager has identified? What happens then? What can the manager do?
So you're an employee and the manager doesn't agree with the solutions you've identified?
Right.
Well, we don't want to have a situation where the manager dictates the solution to the employee. My first point of contact is the employee. So my discussion with the employee is, what do you need to succeed at work? What has worked for you? And I wouldn't dictate the solutions to the employee. But let's pretend that the employee may not have the right solutions in place to the barriers that they've identified. Then I would want to work with a neutral third party, such as a workplace accommodation specialist or someone who is involved in case management, who would help me and the employee get at the solutions that work best for them. That may be an assessment, such as an ergonomic assessment. It could be an occupational therapist that could help the employee identify the solutions. So it's not really, I wouldn't really go to a doctor to get that information. I wouldn't even ask the employee to go to a medical practitioner. I would try to find with the workplace accommodation specialist, the right professional who would help identify the appropriate solutions for the barrier that the employee has noted.
Thank you. Thank you for this response. I'm going to ask you the last question for this segment of the workshop. So us as again, the employee owns the passport. What about sharing the passport? How does the employee share the information on the passport with their manager? And what are the considerations that a manager needs to keep in mind when an employee shares their passport with them?
Thank you so much for that question, because as we've heard from users of the passport through our consultations, their privacy is so important. Oftentimes, accommodation requests are passed by email from person to person without protecting the employee's privacy. So as a manager, I would never share the passport unless I receive the employee's consent. And I would even ask the employee which portions of their passport they would like to share. So perhaps I have a facilities request that maybe perhaps something related to the workstation that the employee has identified the barrier and the solution. The employee would be involved in that email that I would send to facilities. They would be CC'd and the employee would indicate the barrier and solution that is needed for them. Nothing is done without the employee's knowledge and consent. There's no secret here. We're being very transparent. These are the solutions, the supports and tools that will help the employee succeed at work. And so it's very important for me as a manager to have them involved throughout the process. And this is a key thing we've heard from persons with disabilities, chairs and champions. As you know, Luna, it's very important to keep the employee involved throughout the process and always seek their consent. And also appropriately save the passport as a protected B document. Treat it as a confidential document.
Thank you, Clara. Those are very important considerations. And I think it's important to remember that the passport directly applies the nothing without us principle, which means that a person with a disability is involved, is consulted, is meaningfully involved in every decision that affects them. Well, what decision would affect them more than the workplace accommodations that they're going to get in order to be successful at their work? So we need to make sure that the employee is at the center and at the forefront of these conversations so that no confidential information gets disseminated, sometimes inadvertently. So thank you so much, Clara, for these responses. Again, a reminder that we have lots of resources available about the passport on canada.ca, as well as on the Accessibility Hub on GCpedia, the Office of Public Service Accessibility page, where you will find not only resources about the passport, but also a ton of useful resources for all kinds of situations. We also encourage everyone to consult previous issues of our passport newsletter that is published roughly every 2 months. And if you are interested in asking questions or connecting with the passport team, we have a mailbox that we can put the information in the chat so people can have access to the address for the passport mailbox. So we are now at the point where we're going to illustrate all of this with 2 examples. So 2 situations that really depict not necessarily how things are right now in every organization. What we're trying to offer here is we're trying to model the kinds of conversations that should take place between employees and managers about workplace accommodation, using the passport as the tool to facilitate these conversations. So we're going to start with scenario number 1. And for that scenario, we have Dana, Kenny, and we have Missy Thomas, who are going to present to us this scenario. And also, I want to welcome Adiki Puplampo, who's going to be our narrator for these 2 scenarios. So over to Dana and Missy.
Hi, Dana. I'd like to talk to you more about the move to a hybrid work model, as it means I'll need to come work on site 2 days a week. I'd really like to make sure that before returning to the office, we talk about the barriers I'm facing and potential solutions that may work best in both of these environments. So I've shared my passport, which includes previous accommodations that have worked for me in the office.
Missy, I'm glad you brought that up because I know there's been a lot of confusion about what's available to employees, particularly as we navigate the hybrid workplace. As I just received your passport in my inbox today, I haven't had a chance to thoroughly review it yet. Would it be okay if we took the time now to talk through the barriers and solutions you've identified? Together, we can discuss what needs to be present in both of your work locations for you to succeed.
That sounds great. So the first barrier I identified has to do with lighting in the office. At home, of course, I'm able to change the lighting in my home office. However, since I started this job during the pandemic, I don't currently have a similar accommodation in the office. In my passport, I've outlined a couple of potential solutions that have worked in my previous job. Perhaps we could start by finding an office close to the windows where we can turn off the overhead lights. And if that doesn't work or doesn't really address my barrier enough, we can look at alternative solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. And the second barrier you've identified has to do with computer monitors we use in the office, correct?
Exactly. My second barrier involves the standard desktop screens in the office. The glare and the nature of the graphics present a barrier. And I really need an e-ink or an electronic paper screen, which produces an effect more like paper than a typical LCD monitor.
That sounds like a great solution. Uh, Is this something that you would require in both your work environments?
Yes, I need an e-ink monitor in both my office, my home office, and in the office. But I already have one in my home office, actually, as I've outlined in my passport. So I really just need the same e-ink monitor in the office.
Great. Uh, Thanks for walking me through the solutions in your passport, Missy. I'll sign it and return it to you as soon as possible. And in the meantime, if you could please send me the specifications for your e-ink monitor that you're currently using at home and that works for you, I'd be happy to contact our colleagues in IT to have it available for you to use while you're working in the office.
Thank you. That sounds like a great way forward, and I'll send you the information right away.
With the employee's consent, the manager follows up with facilities and IT to put the accommodations in place. The manager works with facilities to identify potential workspaces in the office near windows where they can turn off the overhead lights and shares these potential locations with the employee. The manager asks if the employee would be available to come into the office to test out the locations and help find a suitable workspace, and then proceeds to put a request to turn the overhead lights off. After receiving the specifications for the e-ink screen the employee required, the manager made the necessary arrangements with IT to procure the monitor, and the employee received the screen within 3 weeks thanks to the cooperation of the organization's corporate services.
Yes, thanks so much. A great example, Dana, Missy, Adiki. This example highlights a number of things. The first is that we most of us, or the vast majority of us, get monitors, computer monitors to work. And what this example illustrates is really the recognition that not everyone can use a standard monitor that we provide, and the recognition that someone needs to be able to function differently. The second thing it illustrates, it's really the whole, in this context where hybrid work is becoming so much of a concern. It's so prevalent. We want to, as a public service, learn how to be a hybrid workplace. It does illustrate the importance of making sure that wherever they are working, employees have the tools and supports that they need to do their work. So thanks again. And now on to our second scenario, which is a little different. And for that second scenario, we have Joel Serson from our uh, uh, Office of Public Service Accessibility team. We have Marlene Arshinov from Shared Services Canada, Accessibility, Accommodation, and Adaptive Computer Technology team. We have Alicia Kelly, who is from the policy area of the Office of Public Service Accessibility, and they've all agreed to model this scenario for you, as well as Adiki, who continues to be our wonderful narrator. Please go ahead.
While working on a farm, an employee responsible for livestock management is pinned by a bull in a pen and dislocates their shoulder. After being off work for a few weeks, the employee can return to work with changes to how they perform their tasks while they recover. The manager has kept in contact with the employee during their absence and has scheduled a meeting with them at their convenience to talk about returning to work.
Hi, Alicia. Thanks so much for taking the time to meet with me. I understand you'll be able to return to the office in 2 weeks, and I wanted to check in with you in preparation for your return. How are you doing?
Thank you, Joel. I'm looking forward to returning. I am still quite sore though, and not at 100%. I've been cleared for light duties and would like to start easing back into work, which is why I wanted to have this chat with you today to discuss the best way forward in terms of my work duties for at least the next 12 weeks.
Considering the very physical nature of your current work duties, I think it would be helpful for us to bring in a workplace accommodation specialist to help us figure out how best to modify your duties.
That sounds great. Thank you. I will also need time to attend my medical appointments to aid in my recovery.
That won't be a problem since it's part of your return to work. Let's look into how best to record the appropriate leave when you do need to take time off your medical appointments related to your workplace injury.
The manager schedules a meeting with the workplace accommodation specialist for later in the week.
Hi, Marlene. Thank you for meeting with us. As you know, we're looking to get your perspective on how we can temporarily modify Alicia's work duties.
Marlene, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Of course, I would be pleased to help. Previously, Alicia, your job duties included physical tasks like managing livestock and lifting heavy items, but these tasks now present a barrier for you, and you are no longer appropriate as you recover. My first suggestion would be that you find someone to take over the manual labor tasks associated with your job for the time being.
You already have someone doing that work on a temporary basis, so we'll just extend them for the duration of your recovery.
Excellent. My second suggestion would be to modify any physical tasks associated with her work.
Over the past 3 weeks, we've hired 5 new employees, so we'll need support training for them. With all your experience, Alicia, I think it would be a good assignment for you to take on while you heal.
Thanks, I agree. I do have a lot of experience on this team, and an assignment like this will allow me to continue contributing to our team while I also recover.
I think there are some great accommodations that you have a clear path going forward. I suggest that you document the workplace barriers you face as a result of your injury and the solutions we've discussed today in the GC Workplace Accessibility Passport. Once that's done, both of you need to sign the passport agreement and commit to these accommodation solutions.
The employee completes the passport agreement and the manager signs it. After 12 weeks of recovery and 2 weeks of physiotherapy paid for by the employer, the employee is cleared to return to their regular work duties. The employee and the manager schedule a meeting to review and update the employee's passport.
Thank you so much to all of you, Joel, Alicia, Marlene, and of course Siddiqui, for illustrating a less conventional situation to those of us who are such office types. And so, as you can see, this example illustrates how modifying the duties can really help someone through a gradual return to work and keep them contributing, ensuring that your team can benefit from the expertise of and the experience of the employee and gradually ease them back into work. Now, not all situations will be as smooth as the two examples we have showed you today. What we want to make sure is that you remember the importance of creating this safe environment where the employee feels comfortable talking about their barriers and solutions. They feel comfortable sharing information from their passport with you as a manager, and that you together, the two of you work on finding the right solutions, getting to this yes moment where you both agree on what needs to happen next. it also, these all examples also illustrate that as a manager, you need to take some actions to make sure that these accommodation tools and measures are implemented as quickly and as smoothly as possible. As managers, you have tools at your disposal. You have acquisition cards, you have delegated authorities, but you're not alone. There are people both in your own departments and in groups such as the ACT, or Accessibility, Accommodation, and Adaptive Computer Technology group at SSC that Marlene is part of, uh, who can help you identify solutions when you don't know what to do, and could put you in touch with the right resources so you can procure or implement those solutions. So I we were very efficient in this using our time in this workshop. So we are now at 2:16 according to my computer, and I'd like to take a short break to allow you to breathe or do whatever you need to do within 5 minutes. Also, because we've thrown a lot of information at you, and so we want to give you an opportunity to digest some of this information. We will come back at 2:21 to answer your questions. So please feel free to put those questions in the chat or to raise your hand at the time, and Clara Morgan will return. Will be back with us managing the question period. So enjoy the 5 minutes breather, and please do come back to ask your questions.